Thanks so much for joining. Today's webinar is all about PDF UA and WCAG and how they work together. So I want to talk a little bit about understanding what an accessible PDF really is, what it looks like, and what standards we're looking to in an accessible PDF. What makes an accessible PDF? All right, well, I'll start with a really quick intro to me because this is the really boring part. But my name is Amanda Mace, and I am the Vice President for GrackleDocs Australasia. And so my role is basically to promote and talk about PDF accessibility and web accessibility in general, digital accessibility across the region. I'm a digital accessibility expert and have been in the industry for approximately 13 years. This is now my 13th year in the industry. So I've had lots of experience over that time. I started as a web tester doing manual audits against the WCAG standard, the Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. And as someone with that type of experience and this many years under my belt, I actually also lead our manual WCAG auditing team here at GrackleDocs, as well as being Vice President of the Australasia region. So one of the things that I probably hear most often when speaking about PDF accessibility is, well, basically, why do I need this? Why do I care about PDFs? What is this PDF UA thing? And why can't I just make them WCAG compliant? So part of the reason I have such an interest in accessible documents is that in 2019, I was asked to write in a chapter for a textbook called Web Accessibility, A Foundation of Research, which my chapter was actually all about document accessibility. And I touched there on sort of the usual suspects, including EPUB, Word documents, and PDF. And the latter included a section almost making the case for PDF with an accessibility lens. So it's been a really long road, and I actually just want to start by saying that my advice has changed over the time, over the years that I've been in the industry, as technology has progressed and standards have evolved to reflect that progress. So it's really important to mention that. Today, I'm hoping and to help you understand the similarities as well as the differences between the different standards that affect PDFs in particular, and why it's important that you understand what you need to be asking for when you're requesting your downloadable content to be accessible. So I think where we need to start is to basically set the record straight. PDF UA and WCAG are not mutually exclusive. They're not mutually dependent, but they're always complementary. So that's the foundation for our session today. Asking for something to be accessible in a PDF does not mean not being WCAG compliant, but it also doesn't mean that being compliant to WCAG or WCAG to ICT, I'll talk about that in a moment, is correct either. It's about being compliant for a specific format with the overarching principles of accessibility. So why are we even talking about PDFs? Look, I can tell you that this debate has been raging for some time. This issue has been ongoing for a long time, including within federal governments. The conclusion generally has been to avoid PDFs where possible, that it was too hard to make them accessible. We've even had recent advice that they can't be made accessible properly, which isn't really true. I'm about to explain why. But despite all of this, and what's really important to acknowledge is that the usage is growing. It's hard to put an exact number on it, but approximately the numbers are about 1 billion PDFs are uploaded to the web every year. So in 2015, 10 years ago, the VP of Adobe at the time put the number of PDF documents online at about 2.5 trillion, adding about 1 billion every year since that time. So the world persists with PDF, and considering that use of PDF actually predates the existence of the internet, I don't think it's going anywhere. So we do need to understand both the function and the advantages of PDF documents and essentially what does PDF do well, and therefore why would we choose to use them? And I think that's really an important part of this discussion. Not that everything needs to be a PDF document. Of course, that's not true. But why is it important that they are a source of how we get content? So part of that is really around the portability of them. So PDF is literally the portable document format, and that is crucial when we're uploading larger documents that are designed to be shared. Their compressibility is a major contributing factor to this. Many documents like invoices, operating procedures, manuals, safety data, academic literature, annual reports, they require the PDF format. Some of them require it from a law or legal point of view, right? So it's literally a legal requirement. But a PDF certainly makes a 300-page document possible, where an HTML equivalent, depending on what it is, probably is not the best format for that. So the portability of a PDF makes them one good reason that you might continue to use this format as part of your communication digital content strategy. And it's important that we acknowledge that. We also have things like universal acceptance of PDF. So it became sort of the universal basic format for print applications in the 90s. A key reason for this is the way that PDF maintains its format, despite the, sort of the operating system used to view it. So being able to hold that format, so widely accepted that PDFs are almost, when you say document, people think PDF often. So if we're talking, we need to upload that document to the internet, people think PDF immediately. And that universality kind of makes them ideal for sharing knowledge internationally and across different types of devices. There is sort of the idea of trust and security that true or not, I mean, a file can be corrupted regardless of what kind of file it is, but largely accepted for basically their integrity of the content. Things that are native to PDF, such as signatures and watermarks. These features include, password protection, that sort of thing. Offer security features that are universally seen as, largely accepted. Whatever your view on PDF is, basically, my point is they're here to stay. They're not going anywhere. The fact, and that fact itself actually makes it incumbent on all of us to work within the accessibility industry or advocating for accessibility to embrace and continue to improve accessibility for this digital file format. In my opinion, it is not good enough to just say, make it a web page. That's not practical. It's not going to happen. And there are some times where it's actually not the best format for the content. So I just want to put it out there that there's a good reason why we need to talk about PDF accessibility. Ignoring the issue or sweeping it under the rug is actually not very helpful at all. Contrary to popular belief, and despite my earlier reference to Adobe and the former VP or current VP, can't remember, of Adobe, Adobe do not own, and no longer, at one point they did, but they do not own PDF. Basically, since PDF's beginning in 1993, Adobe produced a rulebook called the PDF Reference. And this is a manual that can be used when you're making, manipulating, or viewing viewing PDFs. However, in 2008, July 1st, 2008, version 1.7 of the PDF Reference was rewritten by ISO, by the International Standard of Organization, as ISO 32,000. So now the PDF format lives as is defined by ISO 32,000, which was updated in 2021, in case you're interested. If you really like standards like I do, and if you've ever heard me talk before, you know that I love standards. This is it's got a really interesting journey. But what's most crucial about this is that the ISO standard ensures that the PDF document, whether it be produced in the US can be accessed, or in Australia or in New Zealand, or in Asia, can be accessed in India or Japan or wherever it may be. So it's a living process of creating an ISO standard. And it means that when we have standards, we have a baseline, right? So, and also continual improvement of the format. So this global acceptance and global application of a standard is really important. And the accessibility of these files, to whatever extent you're willing to admit to, is an evolving living, breathing thing that should be actively encouraged by accessibility advocates and accessibility experts, in my opinion. So that brings us to PDF UA, this magical standard that we're here to learn about. What is it and what does it mean? So the UA literally stands for Universal Accessibility. Very creative, I know. And it's a project that started as early as 2004, so it's not new. Good to keep that in mind. And basically, it's where the reality of PDF content that was inherently not made to, not designed to be accessible, was suddenly being used in a way that needed to be accessible. So remember, PDFs initially were designed to be printed and transferred from one machine to another, right? So again, predating the internet, it was to one print shop could see what the designer had built and then print it off perfectly every time. Its purposes were entirely visual, with no thought to accessibility initially. So when UA started being contemplated by Adobe and AIM, so AIM is a American group that works in conjunction with the PDF Association, the goal was to increase the accessibility of content within the PDF context. And to continue my love of quoting standards, and yes, this is where my career has led me to, PDF UA is also an ISO standard. So that International Standard of Organization has an ISO standard. So it's 14298-1, and it's a normative technical standard. This is going to be super boring for everyone else, but it's important to understand the difference between the normative a technical standard or technical specification. So normative, what does that mean? It means that the standard provides guidance for developers, well, typically developers, to better understand what they need to know when creating an accessible PDF. What PDF UA is not, is it's not a guideline like WCAG. All right, so WCAG itself is content and outcome based. PDF UA is what you need to do from a code or programmatic language point of view to ensure technology, including assistive technology, can render the PDF content correctly and with context. Right? So WCAG is outcome based. WCAG very rarely tells you how you have to do something. It talks about outcomes. So you need an alternative for non-text content. There are 300 ways you can do that on the web. All right. The most common way being using the alt tag, but there are lots of ways that you can do that. PDF UA is a little bit different. It's a technical specification. It is telling you how to do things in a programmatic sense to make them more accessible. So PDF and web content in general, PDF UA and WCAG do go hand in hand. Just like the web and PDF documents have a complementary place sort of alongside each other, right? It's all complementary. If you make your PDF align with the principles of WCAG, all right, while complementary, it is not going to make your document PDF UA compliant or vice versa, right? So there are different considerations between PDF UA and WCAG, right? They actually concentrate really on different things, given the sort of intended consumption parameters of the user. So it's understanding that there are differences between WCAG and PDF UA, and then what those differences are that make a document the most accessible. And this is an important point to keep in mind as we get into some of the more technical details of these two standards. So I'll try not to bore anyone with too much technical detail, but it's really important to understand that WCAG is not PDF UA and PDF UA is not WCAG. These are two different standards. Now, in order to apply the principles of WCAG to PDF, we actually need to look not to WCAG, but to WCAG to ICT. So WCAG to ICT is actually not a standard, but a group note from the W3C who create WCAG. All right, so the group who creates it, the working group, the Accessibility Guidelines Working Group, of which I am a member, has a group note from that working group on how to apply WCAG to non-web content. Now, keeping in mind that WCAG literally stands for Web Content Accessibility Guidelines. WCAG to ICT is advice from the working group about how you can use those same principles to general ICT. So this is an important note because documents aren't the same as HTML pages. And there are some success criteria in WCAG that simply don't apply or would have to be slightly different, like a differently marked, whether a pass or a fail or a best practice based on the different format. So I'm going to get into that a little bit later as well. But if you hear someone say this is WCAG compliant, you actually can't make a document WCAG compliant. You can use the principles of WCAG and WCAG to ICT to apply to a document. Those principles are pretty universal, but it can't be WCAG compliant because WCAG is actually about web content. So what are the benefits of PDF UA? We've got these two standards. They're giving us different things. Well, some of the reasons that the standard is sort of beneficial, not just to developers and people who are creating the content, but to users, is firstly, it encompasses clear technical requirements, just like validating your HTML on the web. All right, PDF UA is primarily aimed at developers of software for creating, reading, editing, validating PDFs, and at suppliers of assistive technology. So this standard is well defined and constantly evolving for the accessibility of documents. Right, so it's a technical specification. I cannot say that enough. Secondly, compliance with the standard ensures compatibility, right? So relevant software, hardware, digital documents can work together as effectively as possible. The PDF UA standard not only defines the document, but gives clear specifications for assistive technologies and readers too, right? So it's a comprehensive standard in this sense. It takes into account not just the document, but the consumption of that document too. Thirdly, it actually is also a really good basis for machine checking. Because it's not outcome-based, there are 108 machine verified success criteria defined within the standard. So these are made obvious within the Matterhorn protocol. The Matterhorn protocol is a testing model for testing compliance of the PDF UA standard. So again, it's really important. This is why I talk so often about WCAG being, or WCAG to ICT and PDF UA being complementary, because this is taking care of the technical part, and there's a huge benefit to that. And then, of course, the missing link here is making sure that the outcome is right, which is the WCAG side of that. PDF UA is also focused on the user experience and smart devices, right? So PDF UA is a consideration of the intended environment and the method of consumption. So think about this as future-proofing. I say all the time on the web, when I talk about web accessibility, and I say this about document accessibility too, you do not create new technologies, assistive or otherwise, with bad code in mind. You innovate and create with standards-based best practice code. This is why in web accessibility, we talk about using best practice, standard-based, validate your HTML, same thing in PDF. Right? Best practice, validate, right? It's all about programmatic language, technology talking to technology the way that it should. Remember, assistive technology is just technology rendering the code for the user. Now, again, complementary. WCAG forms this missing link, right? So WCAG to ICT gives us the missing link between the document accessibility and the requirements of PDF UA, right? So the focus of how we use WCAG to ICT, with that focus on documents specifically, rules for PDF, right? So I know this is a recurring theme, but it's worth repeating myself, right? It's too critical to not emphasize is that these two things can work together and they should work together. It is no good making a PDF UA compliant if your document, if your color contrast is terrible, right? Because you're still leaving people out, right? Additional things that are worth mentioning, right? PDF UA is product and company independent, right? So this means it doesn't rely on any specific technology, and users have basically those international standards to use to evaluate requirements, which is really important. And that leads to sort of the global acceptance that we have, implementation of PDF UA, its incorporation into digital accessibility as a whole, but specifically into the PDF ecosystem. And it's referenced, of course, now in many legal areas. So as someone who lives in Australia, I can tell you that the recent advisory guidance from the Human Rights Commission here in Australia is now quoting PDF UA when you publish a PDF document online, right? So here we've got also in this region, we now have rules saying, hey, if you want to avoid litigation and you're producing PDFs, they need to be PDF UA compliant. So PDF UA focuses on the technical accessibility, not the content. What WCAG to ICT does, and this is a great standard, is it focuses on all those other aspects of the content. For that reason, you'll notice that a lot of the PDF UA things, they don't specify content-related aspects, right? They defer to WCAG for those elements. So if WCAG's doing this great job at sort of the overarching principles, why do we need a spec for PDF? And why can't we just leverage what WCAG says? So there are 32 pieces of guidance from the working group, techniques on how to apply WCAG to PDFs that are provided by the W3C. So why can't we just rely on that? And I guess the first point is that PDF is not web content. I am never obliged to post a PDF to a web page. I can create it on my PC, put it on a thumb drive, hand it off to my colleague, Albert over here, who's in the room. And Albert can then open that PDF on his PC and read the file. This is a very different mentality to the way that the document's probably created, right? And very different to how the web works. The other thing to consider is for people don't really author web pages, right? When you're writing content, you're typically writing into a different application. So when we're writing a document, you might be starting in Word or Google Docs or anything like that. But when you're writing a web page, it's going into a content management system, right? PDF is definitely different, right? You're creating a PDF from a text sort of file, maybe an InDesign file, but you're not pulling in code that's kind of predetermined there for you as part of the CMS. So the content, the way that's created, how often it's created as well, who has access, everyone can make a PDF. But how many people in your organization actually have access to the CMS and just putting stuff out there? The restrictions within the CMS are much more stringent than someone who wants to create a Word file and then PDF it. We make PDFs literally all of the time. It's why there are so many out there. They're so easy to do. So it's really important to acknowledge and understand the differences between web content and PDF content, right? There are different capabilities within each file, within each format, with different file types, and those pieces need to be respected and understood in their given context. If we ignore these differences, we're actually missing a really important piece of the puzzle. I have never, ever heard a company say we don't need our documents anymore. You know why? Because that's not reasonable. Even if you have a web page first policy, right? No one's ever said we don't need any more documents. Now, obviously, that doesn't mean we shouldn't call unneeded content. Right? And even if we ignore that different formats for different purposes argument, rewriting content that already exists is a costly and time-staking process, right? So surely we have to have the appropriate format for content, whether that be web or PDF, and have it be accessible in whatever format it is best suited. So people who are working around PDF, recognize its unique capabilities that need to be addressed in order to create that equal access to the content. Again, documents do different things in web content, and people who are working with that now obviously want to make sure that when we're providing documents, that we're providing the best experience for everyone, regardless of the type of assistive technology you may be using to access the file with, and acknowledging that there are billions, trillions of these things floating around the internet and sitting on desktops. And we want to make sure that authors understand that they can make their documents accessible and compliant. So what's not in WCAG? So one of the things we look for is a document of trust, right? We want to make sure that the PDF is always reliable in the way that it renders, in the way that it prints, in the way that it's viewed, in the way that assistive technology interacts with that content. And that isn't captured in WCAG. There's a couple of bits here that are really interesting from a WCAG point of view. So WCAG, up until its latest release, had a success criterion called parsing, which was basically requiring developers to validate their code. Now, because of where user agents, so browsers, have come along, when code has a little hiccup in it, often the browser will fix it. We've gotten rid of that criteria. It's actually no longer one that we check for within WCAG. But documents do need to have, in order for the reliability about how they're going to be rendered, they need to have that sort of best practice integrated into them to ensure that assistive technology interacts with it appropriately, that it is rendered regardless of the type of reader that you're looking at it on, that it prints the same as it should, all of those things. That actually becomes a really important part of a document. And as such, as you can imagine, programmatic language becomes really important. Fonts are a really fascinating piece of PDF accessibility, not just from a design standpoint either, but from an embedding standpoint. So there's a section within PDF UA, 7.21, in case you're curious, which is here on my slide. And it's critical for kind of, I guess, accurate conveyance of the author's intent with legibility. So what we're able to do is sort of smoothly render that content in any size, which is super important. And yes, there are some fonts that are still not available for that rendering, particularly in certain dialects. But the cool thing here is that some assistive technology can interact with an embedded font if it's embedded correctly and convert those to different types of fonts. So people who have dyslexia could then potentially swap out for a new font that's easier to read, access that content in a way that's more approachable for them than maybe what the author intended. So there's a real importance around customization that can speak to this bit. Another difference between, and this is a great way to highlight the difference between web content and PDF content. In the vast majority of PDF files, as well as other file formats, so Word files, Google, whatever you're using, headings are the only sort of feature providing that intra-document navigation for assistive technology users, right? So being able to understand not just contextually the content that you're reading, but also being able to navigate. So WCAG only addresses the navigational role of headings as an option in place of something like a skip link. So this would fall under success criteria 241 for those of you who like that sort of thing. That's called bypass blocks. What PDF UA requires, though, is it requires for it to be logically structured to enable navigation. WCAG does not require headings to be correctly nested. It's a note that best practice would be that they're correctly nested. So correctly nested means that you have heading level 1 followed by heading level 2, heading level 2 followed by heading level 2, or heading level 3, so on and so forth. Because web content is dynamic, so your header and your footer generally are static, or the same, especially the footer, often static and the same. Your content is really dynamic inside, depending on what page you're at. So we don't require in WCAG for there to be correctly nested headings. It's a best practice, but it's not a requirement to pass WCAG. So PDF UA is a requirement because that content is static. It's not changing. So it does require that headings are correctly nested in order to pass. So while it's a best practice advice in WCAG, it's a mandatory thing in a PDF file. And that's a great acknowledgement of the different type of content and the way it's being viewed as a user in this scenario. There are a couple of other bits and pieces, but the sum of it is that PDF UA is a standard for the bones, the structure of the PDF, and WCAG to ICT covers the content. So to make a PDF truly accessible, it needs to be both PDF UA and WCAG to ICT compliant. And anything less than that actually misses the mark. All right. So PDFs can and should be made accessible. They aren't going anywhere, but it is our responsibility, just as it is with web content, to ensure that everyone, regardless of ability, has that equal access to the content within them. What does PDF UA not define? So this is just as important as understanding what it does define. In broad terms, PDF UA does not address dynamic functions, right? That is typically the domain of websites. So things like multimedia, actions, scripting, design, and content itself. It is not meant to address or interfere with content or creativity. What it does do is provide guidance about how people should be making that content accessible from a programmatic point of view. And when it is a content consideration, that's when PDF UA basically recommends referencing WCAG to ICT. So it's really pushing both of these standards to work together, of which I have said a million times, but I cannot reiterate this enough. It is really important that we use both of them. Documents, I spoke a little bit about this earlier, but I just want to address this in a more succinct way. Documents begin their life differently than web pages. So a lot of documents start as Word documents, like PDFs start as Word documents. A lot of documents are as Google Docs. It's important that the source document that you're starting with is as accessible as possible before you convert it to a PDF. And I'll go over some main principles about that in a moment. But it is possible to make the content in the Word document more accessible in sort of that docx format. You can do a really good job and have that carry over to the PDF when you save as PDF. The same with things like InDesign, right? If you're using InDesign, you still need to embed all of the good stuff, alt text headings. But I will say my tip of the day from an InDesign point of view, if you're using InDesign, is if you want that stuff to come out the other side as tags in a PDF, make sure you save as an interactive PDF for it to convert into proper tags for a final PDF. So starting with your source document is always a good idea. And the main principles remain the same, right? So when you're formatting your source document, make sure headings are programmatically defined. In Word, you can find this in your styles. I hate that they call it styles. It should be navigational pane, but anyways, or structure pane. But your styles pane, those are your headings. If you programmatically define them in your Word document and save as PDF, they're going to come out as heading tags, which is really good to know. Adding alt text, so text alternatives to your images. So make sure you're checking all of your graphics and table related content, Can you simplify your table? Can you explain the infographic? Those bits and pieces become really important for creating. So once it's on the PDF side, you might have to clean it up a little bit to make it PDF UA compliant, but these are things you can do before then. Utilizing your properties. So things like language, title, all of these are really important to get right on the source document if you can. Now, sometimes that's a little bit tricky. So for example, in Microsoft products, the source document will produce the language that typically your Microsoft is in. So if you're originally from Spain, and you bought your computer in Spain and you have your Microsoft account in Spanish, but you're creating an English document, you might on the PDF side have to change the language. In fact, most likely will. I've actually seen some really interesting results. I was doing some remediation on an academic document, a PDF. It'd been put together by a number of doctoral students. And it was quite funny. So whoever had originally done this document had written up the document. So the whole thing was in English. But the person who had put all of the research together and submitted the paper was Portuguese. And obviously their Microsoft Word was Portuguese. And so the document came through and I tried to read. My first go-to whenever I'm testing anything is to read with a screen reader. And I tried to read it with NVDA and it tried to say the English words in Portuguese because programmatically it was being told that that document was in Portuguese, not in English, even though the words were definitely English. So small things like that can make a big difference. Obviously, do things like proofread, so you don't have spelling errors, grammar errors, that sort of thing, making sure that the document makes sense. But ideally, you want to do as much of the accessibility work as you can in the source document so that you're only doing a bit of the cleanup in the final PDF. And what happens when we have the final PDF? How are we checking for accessibility from a PDF UA point of view? So not from a WCAG point of view. I'm not talking about color contrast here. I'm really, that requires sort of manual review. I'm very much talking about how do we manually check those 108 machine checking abilities within that framework for PDF UA. So there are two main ones. One is we can check accessibility using the Adobe Pro Full Check. And there are other tools available to check PDF UA. So Grackle has a free one called GrackleGo. GrackleGo checks for PDF UA. Adobe Checker does not. So the quick explanation here is that the Adobe Accessibility Checker does not adhere to WCAG to ICT or PDF UA standards or any other accessibility standard for that matter. Right? So you might have noticed that the accessibility checker in Adobe specifically does not mention which or any standard in which it's checking for conformance. It simply says full check without specifying what it's doing a full check of. So one example of many where Acrobat's accessibility checker falls a little bit short is in list numbering attributes. So Acrobat will not ask for verification of it, but it is actually critical with this. All right, so it's not doing it gives a false sense of security is what I'm saying. So you really need something that's going to be checking from a compliance point of view. You need to be looking at something that checks for PDF UA. Now, I thought it would be a good idea, if I'm going to mention these checkers, to walk you through what a PDF UA checker would do and how to do it. So I just saw Jillian's comment. GrackleGo is a free PDF UA checker. I'm going to provide a QR code at the end of this presentation to get for you to be able to sign up for it. It's web-based, so there are other PDF UA checkers. There are other free ones as well. However, as far as I know, there isn't any other web based one, so no web applications that do a PDF UA check. And that is problematic because Mac makes things really hard to in terms of software. So most, if not all, that I know of are only available on Windows computers, which is all well and good, except most designers use Mac. So not super helpful in that scenario. So what's really great about the GrackleGo one is that you can, it's a web application. You can drag your file, your PDF file in, or you can choose your file with the upload button or the choose files button. Either way, easy way to check your file. Automated checks are only part of the equation though. So I need to say this. All right, automated tools do a part, manual checks are needed too. It's never good enough to just run something through an automated checker. Make sure you do manual checks too. All right, so once you run your report, you get, or your PDF document in, you'll get a report. So there's a couple of cool things about the GrackleGo one that's worth mentioning. First is your accessibility grade. So you'll notice in my screenshot, I've got sort of the underneath the document, which has your document properties in there. And then just below that says file performance, accessibility grade. You know, I've put a really good document through. It may or may not have been a Grackle sample, which has been made accessible. It says accessibility grade A, which is obviously quite a passing one. We have no errors and no warnings on here, which is always good. I've talked about the universal access. So meaning whether you're on a tablet, a PC, a Mac, whatever it is, GrackleGo is a click away, no installation required, no software to download, is completely free. So you don't have to pay anything for it, which is also really good. It gives you a printable summary report, so you can actually share that report with others. But the best part about GrackleGo, in my opinion, is this bit, the results in detail. So within GrackleGo, you have the ability to dig deeper beyond sort of that one-pager report that says pass, fail, pass, fail, pass, fail type thing. This goes deeper insight with descriptions of each error. You can expand the error. The tool even highlights the specific location if it's applicable. There may be, you have, you may have something inside that document that's sort of in the, I wanted to say header code, but that's web, in the properties, which obviously couldn't then highlight that because that's in the properties. But if there's a place to highlight, it absolutely will highlight. It's interactive. It's an interactive report. It gives a full list of all the FUA checks that are being done. And for each item in the list, you can see sort of that corresponding status and the item count. And then you expand to see more details, including the issue highlighted within the document. So this is probably the best part, in my opinion, of how GrackleGo works. I will pop up for just a moment the GrackleGo QR code. So this is, you go to this, sign up, you'll get a login, and you'll be able to get GrackleGo for free. And I've only got one more slide after this, but I do want to say that ultimately, there's a lot of detail within PDF UA. And the truth is that understanding the importance of why we need PDF UA, you don't need to know all of the technical details. Frankly, that's just like you don't need to know everything about HTML unless you're a developer. Unless you are a document remediator or someone particularly interested in standards like me, you probably don't need to know all of the things. But what you do need to know is how to check for it. And that you should be asking for it. So when you're having documents made, you should be asking, are these PDF UA compliant, and know how to check for it. And if you're a document creator, your designer, the vendor that's working for you, if they don't know how to do that, then you need to put some onus on them to do it. And so this is about educating yourself about understanding what you should be asking for. There's lots of ways to do this. You can sign up for newsletters, check out social media. GrackleDocs has a blog, meet with like-minded people. So there are some really great resources and really great people out there to know. So I want to mention things like AussieWay, the Australian Web Accessibility Initiative. Lots of great resources there. We've got the Perth Accessibility meetup, which I think we're actually having a name change of that group, but whatever you want to call us, it's there are lots of groups who are doing really great things. Ultimately, the idea is make a plan. Bring in the experts when you need them, but make a plan. You probably have lots of documents, maybe thousands and thousands of documents. Start prioritizing. Does this need to be a document? If it is a document, is it accessible? How do we start prioritizing what needs to be accessible and what doesn't? Start thinking about those standards. You don't need to know the standards in detail, but what ISO standards do you need to be across? What format requires what standard, right? So if you're quoting with every PDF that you need it to be PDF UA compliant, that's a really good start, right? Because if someone doesn't know how to do that, the education happens. You go, oh, okay, we need to know. Can you do this? Do I need to bring in a group of experts, whether that be Grackle or someone else, to come in and remediate that document for us? Do we need to do some upskilling internally? Do we need some software to make sure that internally we're making documents a little bit more accessible? But ultimately, as I say at the end of any time I do any sort of webinar or learn at lunchtime type session, is if you are asking yourself and others around you, is this accessible? That's always a win. Always a win. So finally, and before I open up for questions, ooh, 10 minutes to go. I'm feeling very good today. That never happens. I usually talk for far too long. We're going to be sending out an expression of interest for an open to public June training session online. So this session was going to cover the basics of PDF accessibility and techniques for creating accessible PDFs. This is a really great opportunity, and it's a rare one too. So normally our courses are run for clients in-house for them and not open to public. So I really recommend getting on that list as soon as it's open. Albert Matthews, who is in this call, will be sending out details really soon. So keep an eye out on your emails for that. But we'll be sending those out. It will probably be towards the end of June, I believe. But yeah, I think for now, I'll open up for questions. So pop them in the chat, unmute yourself. Yeah, whatever you like. Interrupt, my kids do, and I don't mind that unless they're telling me they're hungry, because they can't be. I refuse. So please, any questions? Don't make it too easy on me, guys.
Hi, Amanda. Oh.
Got some feedback there, Olivia. Try again. Oh, maybe type it out. No. This is far too easy, everyone.
Sorry, I was just wondering, hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you.
Oh, great. I was wondering if there's going to be some notes or a workbook from today.
No notes or workbook, but we will send around the recording. Jillian, what are the main features to look out for specifically when working in InDesign? Yeah, great question, Jillian. So you want to map your headings, make sure that you've applied your headings. So things structurally, things like heading, threading articles, those sorts of bits and pieces. Also, when you're doing layering, just make sure, so you will get, there's some interesting things when you're layering in InDesign. So what can happen is typically the reading order of things will happen in the way that you put it on. So it's a bit like throwing darts at a dartboard, right? Is that the more darts you throw, the if you put something that's at the very beginning and you've put that quite late, in the piece, you filled that in, then potentially that will be read last instead of first. So it's really important that we have a look at sort of that content panel and how things are ordered for reading. So be really careful in that area. And then secondly, when you're saving from InDesign, obviously do all of that good work, those main features. But the most important thing is when you save as PDF, save as an interactive PDF, because if you don't, the tags won't come through. There's some really great tools. We actually resell a tool called Made to Tag. And Made to Tag is a add-on for InDesign, and it's an incredible tool. It literally will save you hours when it comes to accessibility, and allows for some easier ways of doing things. So particularly if you're working with tables in InDesign, so things like annual reports, financial reports, that sort of thing, it allows to InDesign natively simplistic tables, a bit like Word. It doesn't do complex tables very well. However, with Made to Tag, you can scope tables for really complex tables and structure. So I highly recommend that. Olivia, your hand's up.
Oh, hi. Thank you, Amanda. That was really good. I was wondering if there'll be a workbook or some notes from today.
No, it will share the recording, but there isn't a workbook available. What I can do is share the slide deck. I'm happy to save this as an accessible PDF and share that with you.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
No worries. Lori, is there any standard for a PDF audit? I think the only one we had done covered PDF UA. Thank you. Okay, so there isn't really a standard. I can tell you Olivia, I've got a bit of feedback there. Thank you. I can tell you that at GrackleDocs, what we do is when someone asks for a PDF audit, what we do is we use WCAG to ICT. So that's the principles of WCAG and how they can be applied to documents. There's some things that wouldn't be counted in that, but we would use that. And PDF UA, we would include a PDF UA report. If you only have PDF UA done, typically that would be an automated report, a PDF UA report, not a manual one. And it wouldn't include things like color contrast, for example, because PDF UA doesn't cover that, only WCAG to ICT does. So if you want a good audit, you should have WCAG to ICT and taken into account, as well as PDF UA. Perfect. All right. Well, I think we'll leave it there. I'll stay on, but I will stop recording. And if anyone wants to have a quick chat or has questions that they'd rather not ask on the recording, then we can do that as well. Thank you, everyone, for joining. I really appreciate your time this afternoon, this morning, depending where in the world you are. But thank you so much. And yeah, keep an eye out for Albert sending out an email about the training coming up in June.